I hope you are all suitably refreshed and comforted. For those of you skeptics who didn't believe we're actually in Galway, we're going to show you a shot of what it's like out the window here in the Burn Suite in the Galmont. We're all worried that the talent will flee and they'll all move to Portugal or the Greek islands to work for our various universities. But who couldn't live in Galway with that view? So we're looking across there at Galway Bay. The day has really brightened up. For those of you who know the area, you'll see the hills of the Burren over in County Clare. You might notice Mutton Island Lighthouse and the walkway out to it. But it's a lovely day. It's really cleared up. So just to prove that we're actually here. Now, okay, so I want to introduce our next speaker, who is, I'm going to call him the godfather of conflict resolution. Ray, you don't seem too upset by that title. So Ray has been working in this space for 3 decades, primarily as senior HR roles in industry, including, for example, senior HR advisor to Bank of Ireland. He left that role 20 years ago to go into consulting. And in 2014, indeed, set up his own consulting firm, and that is Concordia Consulting. You can see the logo behind him. Services in the area of investigation, mediation, conflict coaching, conciliation, facilitation, arbitration, and negotiation. All of these things, I like to think of mediation, Ray, as both the dark art of HR as well as the great white hope, because if you do it right, you save a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of emotion. And I know that the people listening in are very aware of that because they're dealing with those kind of issues day to day. I should mention that he's an accredited mediator trainer. I should also mention that he's on the panel of adjudication officers at the National Workplace Relations Commission. And the most important thing of all, he's a graduate of NUI Galway. I should, for the record, though, say that we share him with Trinity. Although with a surname like Flaherty, I think you must be Galway through and through. That must be where your heart is, right? Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Now, Ray is going to speak about the topic of mediation in a remote environment. He's going to draw on his experience there and to share how that works and some of the pros and cons of it. I should say that his presentation is 15 minutes long. He has purposefully left 9 or 10 minutes for questions because he expects the things he talks about today are really going to prompt a lot of questions in the chat. So please do fire them in. We've loads of time to come back to Ray with questions. In the meantime, Ray, I'm going to hand over to you, wave with you, and I'll be back to you in 15 minutes, Ray, okay? Thank you.
John, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm not so sure about the godfather piece. I think it's more the grandfather piece at this stage. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me along this morning. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be addressing you this morning. I'm very conscious that after all of the positivity and enthusiasm and optimism of the earlier session around remote working, etc., and the hybrid working model, that I'm now going to drop workplace conflict into the middle of all this, just in case you were getting too carried away with yourselves. My topic this morning is mediation in a hybrid working environment, dispute resolution in the new normal. Now, I suppose that brings me to consider 2 questions. What has happened to dispute resolution during the pandemic, during the lockdowns in particular, and how will it emerge from that, and how will it operate in the new hybrid work situation that we've been talking about all morning, and that we're all actually experiencing and probably grappling with. So I'm going to consider these 2 questions in the context of Rumi's field. In a sense, Rumi's field in a post-pandemic setting. Sorry, I'm presuming my technology is working and that my slides are being presented. I presume if not, Tig or somebody will let me know. But Rumi's field in a post-pandemic setting. And I suspect a lot of you are rubbing your chins and saying, what the hell is he talking about with Rumi's field? Well, Rumi was a 13th century Persian philosopher and poet. And I came across a quote of Rumi's many years ago that has really stuck with me and has in fact influenced particularly my mediation, if not all of the work I do in workplace conflict dispute resolution. And that quote was, or is, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Now, if you think about that, that's at the core of mediation. That's what mediation tries to do. It tries to bring disputants or parties in conflict beyond the right and the wrong, because two parties coming to a workplace conflict are absolutely entrenched in the view that they're right, the other person is wronged, or they are being wronged by that other person. So I try to create the mediation space in Rumi's field, get people to come into that place and have their interactions, their discussions there. So, what has been the impact then on mediation? Well, I suppose, firstly, my definition of mediation, and you'll all have your own definitions, and you'll see the definitions in your various policies and so on, and the MII and places like that. But my preferred definition of mediation is that it's an imperfect process that employs an imperfect third party, i.e. the mediator, to help imperfect people come to an imperfect agreement in an imperfect world. Now, I'm not so sure everybody would agree with that, but when you think about it, there is nothing perfect about any of us as human beings. There is certainly nothing perfect about any of us in our professional and work lives, and there is nothing perfect about the processes we use to try to resolve that conflict. And I can guarantee you there is absolutely nothing perfect about mediators, or most mediators, and certainly I would subscribe to that. So if you take that as the definition of mediation, what could COVID do to that? How could it make it any worse or any better? In a sense, it's an imperfect process, having to deal with the challenge of lockdowns and working from home and all of the attendant challenges that came with that. Well, initially, when March of 2020 hit, nobody visited Rumi's field. It lay fallow for a number of months. And gradually, as things began to open up a bit again, and workplaces got over the immediate challenge of just coping with working from home and coping with all of those challenges, and things began to come back, suddenly Rumi's field went online. Now, if you had said to me 2 years ago, would you conduct your mediations online? I would have said absolutely not. Mediation, okay, there's lots of things might work on online, on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meets or whatever platform you use, but mediation isn't one of them. Well, I've already told you I'm not perfect. I got it wrong. Yes, it did work, and we did conduct mediations online, and there's lots of people, lots of mediators I talk to say, I'm going to do the bulk of my mediation going forward online. I think rather than, like everything else we were talking earlier on about, what's the right way to approach the working from home piece, or the hybrid working environment, what's mediation going to look like in that hybrid environment? This famous word that essentially I think has come from the pandemic, the blended approach. I think it's going to be a bit of both. It's going to be a bit of face-to-face. It's going to be a bit of virtual or remote. And I genuinely believe that the one-to-one meetings, the pre-meetings that a mediator conducts, the confidential one-to-one meeting with each of the parties, I see no reason why they should not be online or remote from here on. I found they've worked extremely well. Obviously, a phone meeting doesn't give you anything like the remote video does, but there is no need to travel a distance either for the mediator or for the parties in dispute to have one-to-one meetings, and they are very remote friendly in my view. However, the plenary session, and that's where the two parties in dispute and the mediator meet, and that's where that's Rumi's field. And I honestly believe that we're going to have to go open the gate and actually physically go into Rumi's field, meet face to face. Why am I saying that? Well, and this is a personal perspective, because I fully understand other mediators will have a different approach and a different view. But the plenary mediation session provides a very special environment for the parties. They're meeting under the confidential and confidentiality requirements of the process. They're there voluntarily, so it is quite a special place. And they're the two key factors that, in my view, help mediation successfully assist people in resolving their disputes or the conflicts between them. And I think it's because there's a dynamic in that room. And I don't think you can replicate that dynamic on a remote plenary session. And I hear what John Reardon is saying in terms of how did he say it? Read the Zoom like you'd read the room. Well, I would respectfully say in a plenary mediation session, I don't think the room will lend itself to being read as well remotely as it is in the flesh, as it were, and in particular for the two parties. And I'll give you an example of this. I did a mediation the week before last. I was asked to assist in a situation where there was a fairly significant dispute had arisen between two members of a senior management team in a company. And this was so serious that one of the parties involved was considered tendering their resignation. Now, this was somebody in a senior position in an organization that loved her job, but because of this incident and the aftermath of the incident with one of her senior management team colleagues, was considering tendering her resignation. At which point the organization got into a bit of a flap and said, "Oh my God, no, you can't do that. Let's see, can we mediate this?" And I was asked to do the mediation. Now, did the two pre-meetings online? No problem. Then we met together in a hotel room with all the social distancing and all the safety protocols, etc. And just as an aside, it's interesting, pre-pandemic, when I would ask a hotel to set up a room for a plenary mediation session by taking out the table and just having 3 chairs spaced in a triangle about 1.5 meters or 2 meters apart, they thought that that I should be certified as insane. Now you go in and it's there for you whether you ask it or not. So that's one of the good things that COVID has done for the mediation world. It makes our plenary meeting setup much more acceptable to the vast majority of people at this stage, or understandable to it in any event. So back to my story. After about maybe 2 hours of an exchange of views, and it was quite robust at times and so on, And then the party who had, I suppose, instigated the incident that led to this colleague wanting to resign, he just stopped at one stage and he said, there's something I'm going to say. And he said, I thought about this. I wasn't going to say it, but because of the way this has gone this morning, I'm going to say it. And at that point, he put his elbows on his knees, he put his head in his hands, and he said, and I quote directly, I am so sorry that incident happened. And that was a complete game changer in terms of the conflict between these two people. Because 10 days earlier, he had said to her, if you were upset by what happened, I'm sorry. Now, you'll all pretty well pick out straight away that wasn't really an apology. That was saying, it's your problem. If you got upset by this, well, tough, but I'm sorry you kind of got upset. But what happened inside in the face-to-face meeting was so impactful, was so real, and he actually got emotional and teary. Now, it's my view, and it's only a personal view, that wouldn't have been achieved on a remote meeting. I'm not sure he'd even have said that. And even if he did, I'm not sure that the impact, because you can feel emotion. And that's what you can't get on the video, on the remote. You can feel that emotion. So therefore, I see where possible at all that the plenary sessions will be face to face, because in my view, it's whatever helps the parties to get resolution. That's what we're looking at. We want to help them to reach a resolution, and I think the face-to-face plenary with the remote one-to-ones, that to me is mediation in the hybrid environment. However, just before I finish, I'm not sure how much time I'm left, but I'm sure John will let me know if I'm going over it. There is something else that the pandemic or the lockdown gave us that I think is going to be very significant in dealing with workplace conflict going forward. Now, it's not true to say it was the pandemic that gave it to us, but under cover of the pandemic, those of us who eagerly await developments in workplace conflict resolution woke up in January of this year to SI number 674 of 2020 on the Industrial Relations Act 1990. And that was the code of practice for employers and employees on the prevention and resolution of bullying at work. Now, you might say to yourself, so what? It's just a code of practice. And it's pulling it all together. Yes, it's a code of practice. It's the first time ever the bullying at work code of practice has got a statutory footing. So a statutory instrument. It's now given the legal standing that it never had before, and the definition, even though the definition doesn't change, the definition is exactly the same as will be in all of your policies, and that was actually coined by the first government work group back in the 90s that coined that definition. But more importantly, it contains something that I have been advocating for years, and that's why I was so pleased to see this in the new code of practice, and that's a thing called the secondary informal process. Prior to this, you had two stages to your dispute resolution under your dignity at work policies. You had an informal stage, and basically that was mediation. So if the parties didn't want to go to mediation, it didn't happen. If they tried it and it didn't produce a resolution, well, it didn't resolve the problem. So you go on to the second stage, which was the formal investigation. And any of you that have managed or have had to deal with formal investigations under your dignity at work will know That's not a nice place to be. It's not nice for the parties. It's not nice for the organisation. And to be honest, it's not nice sometimes for the investigator either. But this is a new process that's coming between mediation and the issue going to the formal stage. And what the Code of Practice says is that you have a nominated person, and the code says appropriately trained and experienced in these matters, and they're appointed to progress the issue to resolution so that both parties can return to a harmonious working environment without bullying being a factor. Now, I think this is going to have a significant positive impact on the workplace conflict resolution scene. Because what this does, it allows somebody to get in, as I used to say, to rummage around in the issues, to talk to the parties, to hear what they have to say, to look at the facts of the case, not to make a ruling, not to make an adjudication, not to make a finding or anything like that, but just to look at it and to see, can you help the parties resolve their issue? And I think that's a big difference, and I was glad to see it in there. And I'm actually at the moment working on two particular cases. It's harder work from my perspective than the mediation, because in the mediation the parties do most of the work. Now I find I'm shuttling between people and trying to get people on board and trying to talk to them. It involves coaching, it involves reality checking, it involves all of that. But I think this will have a positive impact on workplace dispute resolution, particularly relating to dignity at work issues in the hybrid work environment as we go forward. I'm not sure.
I have a couple of questions for you, Ray. Coming
yes,
in.
yes, please.
Yeah, glad we can give some time to them, because there are actually two really good questions from colleagues here listening in. Okay, and they speak very much to what you were talking about, but I think we'll go into the practicalities of these things. First, the first one is, how do you reframe communication in a remote environment? Like in the context of, you mentioned emotion, but those kind of non-verbal cues, how do you do it during virtual? And just from a practical point of view, for those of us who haven't had to manage such a kind of an intense engagement online, are you using things like raise your hand? Are you, muting people? Are you using any of those, thumbs up emojis? Probably not. But are there any extra tools in Zoom, or are you just using it, as a means of talking down the camera to people?
Primarily, John, I'm just using it as a means of connecting, and I find, particularly when I did plenary sessions remotely, everybody just had if there's only 3 people involved, it's easy to manage it. I was interested to hear John Reardon talk about himself as an IT or technological geriatric at the age of 55. You can imagine I'm a decade or so further on what it's like for me. But I don't like a lot of that technology stuff, because I think it takes away from the interaction, from the conversation, from the dynamic. And one of the, I suppose, the more minor reasons I don't anticipate doing too many plenary sessions online is I'd be afraid of my life if I was doing a caucus, which is where you speak to the parties separately, that if I didn't put somebody into the lobby correctly, I'd be having a confidential discussion with party A while party B is sitting there listening into it. So the technology does scare me a little bit. But that's, I suppose, to answer the question. I just use it as a mere means of communicating, but it's not as good, because as I said in my presentation, you can feel things in the room when
Yeah.
you're there with people, like that apology, for instance, that I spoke about earlier.
Thanks, Ray. One more great question we can squeeze in. We're running up against time at the moment. From Pauline, I love this one. Do you sense or foresee that remote working may increase the need for mediation because maybe misunderstandings between work colleagues via email? You know, the way sometimes tone isn't picked through.
Yeah.
So do you think that'll maybe increase the need for, or, you know, these mediating these difficult conflicts?
I think the honest answer to that, John and Pauline, is yes and no. I think remote communications, and particularly email communication and so on, has the potential to create or increase a potential for workplace conflict. On the other hand, it's removing as well some of the things that can happen in when people are side by side in a workplace. But I just don't know. I think it'll probably be a bit of both. But it does reflect back a little bit to the panel discussion after the last session, where people talked about, line responsibility and a new skill set, and having to get a new skill set to deal with the hybrid or remote working environment. I found myself asking the question at that stage, will anything change? And I'm not so sure. Or will it be difficult? Will it be harder? Because the thought that came to my mind was that good managers and good supervisors will continue to manage well. And in fact, I think they will probably take advantage of some of the positives of remote working to do it better. However, and there's a big however, you encounter in workplace conflict situations inappropriate, misguided, poor, weak, absent management.
Mm-hmm.
And
they don't go away, be it digital or face to face.
Does digital give an extra excuse for not doing those things? And I can say that in 90+% of the workplace dispute situations, if you run a timeline from when it started to when it erupted, you will probably find somewhere along there that there was an opportunity missed by management to have resolved it at an earlier point. So I think all of that stuff is still in there, John, and I think it's 50-50 as to whether it'll be worse or better.
Very much for sharing your perspective. We really appreciate it. We wish we could give you more time.
Not at all.
We have to move on to the next one. That was Ray Flaherty. Thank you, Ray, for sharing your expertise there. And I think it chimes with a lot of what we say. At the end of the day, remote or not, we're dealing with humans in nature. And we need to be able to pick up on those cues of when things aren't going so well. Okay.